you have people, bad actors, bad characters, bad cowboys, right, coming in all over trying to kind of stake, quote unquote, stake their territory, but at the same point, with no regard for the patient. So I think that's the really hard part when you're trying to do the right thing, especially when there's no one's looking.
This is MedSpa Mayhem, the podcast all about the chaotic world of medical aesthetics. From Botox to lasers to IV bars, learn how to tell real versus fake, legal versus illegal, and safe versus potentially deadly. Hear the crazy stories inside the med spa world and find out what questions to ask and how to spot the people cutting corners. I'm your host, Dr. Kate D. Together, we explore the wild west of medicine that is the aesthetics industry. In today's episode, I'm speaking again with Nicole Gregory. We have a passion for all things aesthetic and all things chaos in the industry. And we both, in our separate ways, have been trying to influence the industry into being a better citizen. If you haven't listened to that first half of the conversation, that aired on January 15th. In this part two, we'll be talking about the chaos of the industry, the mayhem, and what we separately and together are trying to do about it. I hope you enjoy the second half of our conversation. Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and I'm back today speaking with Nicole Gregory. As you may recall, she's co-founder and CEO of Urban U Beauty and Wellness in Western Michigan. Nicole, thanks so much for being back with me today.
Thanks for having me, Dr. KD. Appreciate you. And I always enjoy talking to you about what's going on in the industry.
Okay, awesome. So I was really hoping that we could talk about the overall topic that's like I'm just completely, utterly passionate about. That's why I have this podcast and wrote the book. And that is just the legal compliance problems in medical aesthetics and all the crazy illegal stuff going on out there. I know it absolutely drives you crazy too. So
Yes.
so I was hoping, I know that you founded a Med Spa Association in Michigan as kind of part of trying to fight the fight. Okay. So if you will, let's outline the problem for our audience. I know that most people listening know that there's utter chaos in the med spa industry. That's why it's called Med Spa Mayhem, right? But
Which is a great name, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. It's funny because my working title when I was writing the book was Med Spa Confidential. And, because Kitchen Confidential was such a great book. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. But when it was time to publish, there was another book by that title, which was really not about the same topic at all. But I was told, oh, it's best to have a different name. And ultimately I came up with Med Spa Mayhem, and I do love it. It really, truly is mayhem. And honestly, since I've written the book, it's only more crazy. Like every day there's a new story or a new crazy thing. And
absolutely.
So, so basically to summarize it, there are people practicing medicine without a license. There are people who have licenses, but they're practicing out of the scope of their license. There are people who with no license at all. There are people buying illegal products off the internet and injecting things that are tainted into people. There's a whole side of it that's illegal corporate ownership, which I think people care less about out there, but I'm sure that you are compliant as a business person. But as a business person, if you're not a doctor in most states, and I don't actually know if Michigan is a strong corporate practice of medicine state.
It is. Yep, it is.
But yeah, so in most states, you can't own a medical practice if you're not a doctor. So there are really important legal structures to make sure that you're doing it legally. Tons of places are doing it completely, outside, basically off the grid. And it's leading to really bad outcomes. I think you've told me a couple stories. You have a couple stories from your own experience about that.
Yeah. I think that was a great summary of the industry, because there's so, as you're talking, like, wait, we should say this. Wait, we should say this. I think the biggest part is it's a newer industry, and you're always going to have this Wild West effect going on that, you have people, bad actors, bad characters, bad cowboys, right, coming in all over trying to kind of stake, quote unquote, stake their territory, but at the same point, with no regard for the patient or, guests, consumer. So I think that's the really hard part when you're trying to do the right thing, especially when there's no one's looking. Because again, there's no one around you. You're in the mirror kind of thing. That's
Yeah.
the same thing with the medical spa industry is there's no one really looking
Right.
because there's no regulation in this industry. And so you're right. People should have a medical director. They should have the right corporate structure. They should have the right training. There are a lot of people who don't have any of those items and want to go
Yeah.
into it because they think there's money in it. And there's always money, right? But I think there's always money in anything that you might want to try, but the logistics of making that happen correctly costs a lot of money. And I think that is where as an industry there's this people doing it, people just kind of jumping in for the money. So yes, we have several stories I can tell you, but I think you said it in your book, and I don't know the exact percent, but there's a huge percent of medical spas operating without medical directors. What is that number?
Well, I think that we don't actually know the number because there are so many illegal spas that are not being
Yeah.
measured.
Yeah.
If you ask AmSpa, I think they quoted like 15% have no medical director at
Mhm.
all, but then it was like 30% have not really a real medical director, but
Right.
that's only the ones that they're measuring. There are so many med spas that are not, they're just completely off the grid under the
Mhm.
radar. And I think the big thing is that, if you're a physician, so first of all, there's no specific med spa regulation, but there's a ton of regulation in medicine, a ton.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
med spas are the practice of medicine.
Yep.
There's not a debate about that. It's so if you're a doctor and you have a license and you
Mhm.
went many, many, many ridiculous years, for me it was
Yes.
10, to get that license, you're not going to do anything that's not legal or you would just never
Right.
imagine it. And from, all that experience that you got in your education and training, what's legal and what's not. But
Uh-huh.
the thing is that if you're not, okay, and you just think, oh, this is cool, I can
Right.
buy this stuff off of the internet and neat, oh, I want to do that. You don't have any medical background to tell you what the dangers are, what the structures are in there that you might hit and damage, what
Mhm.
the rare complication could be where you might actually kill somebody. And we saw in Texas that case where that this woman Amber Johnson owned a med spa, knew nothing about anything, was not a medical person, didn't know she was about to kill her friend Jennifer Cleveland, who she hung an IV, didn't know what she was doing, hung
Yeah.
potassium, killed her, like executed
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when people just think, oh, this is cool, I can make money doing this, why
Uh-huh.
not? Like
Uh-huh.
they don't have any education or background and know that what they're doing is dangerous or illegal.
Uh-huh.
Right. And someone like you're like, well, I'm well educated and I'm a business owner. I need to do this in all the proper ways. And so you had to research that, figure out, oh, okay, I need a medical director, not only to be legal, but also to advise on all the medical things.
Uh-huh.
Right. What's
Right.
your opinion of this new device? Does that device make any sense? Does that device, physiologically dangerous? I mean, sometimes new devices come out and I'm like, well, that's, medically stupid. Like,
Right. Right.
and
That
if you're
makes
not a medical
yeah.
person, you won't know that that's medically stupid and
Yeah.
you might buy it and it's a piece of junk.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Um,
No, and I think you have to go down to your common sense too with hiring. I think there's one thing for me to look as a business person, what it looks like to hire somebody. Do they have the things that we want? And, as an employee at Urban U, which is, they really think about growth mindset. They're humble, they're hungry, they're willing to hustle. But I'll tell you, we put them over to our medical director, Dr. Sanchez, and she'll come back and say, absolutely love this person. And then others will be like, here are my concerns. I'm like, wow, I didn't think of that. So,
mhm.
it's another person. I think that's super important. Like, hey, you should always interview a couple people, especially when you're having an injector, an HCP who's going to be doing, it's a liability, right? So it's great. I always have a few people touch base and make sure they're good for your company. But at the same point, having someone in the medical side, congratulations and thank you for taking 10 years to do your medical degree, because I know that takes a lot of time and energy, and it's not easy. So that's, I go, well, you're a lot smarter than me. Help me understand, what we're not seeing. So I think, yeah, if you're going to do it right, you don't want to just hire somebody because they're the hottest injector. When I say hottest, like, everyone's wanting this new injector to come over from a different med spa, and they're willing to make the jump. We have passed on those types of people so many times because of our medical director. They're like, no, here's some
Mhm.
bad habits they have, like, oh,
Right.
and here's what worked out. I'm like, okay, thank you. So I think it is, yes.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I think that I'm really curious to know how you ended up founding the Michigan Med Spa Association and what it does and how is that functioning so
Yes.
far?
So all the items that we're talking about, just like what does it really look like from the best standard of care and compliance within the industry? We worked pretty closely with AmSpa, and just, I love AmSpa. We've had some really great relationships with them since the beginning, and it's been fun to see them grow. One piece, that really wasn't there was the local piece, the state piece. And so when we started talking to Alex, the CEO of AmSpa, saying, what is this for us to create an organization that can be in step with what you all are doing, but still freedom and flexibility. We did that and created My Spa, which is Michigan's Medical Spa Association. We've been around for 2 years. We have close to 30 members, and we're growing right now, which is really exciting. But it's really interesting. It's a lot of money to grow an association because it takes time. And unfortunately, no one wants to join an association. Things in the industry are going right. And so now that
Right.
we're seeing bad outcomes and people, like we said, this fragmentation and all the saturation going on, we're seeing bad outcomes. People are coming to us. When I say people, it's healthcare professionals saying, I want to be a part of this because I want to provide the best standard of care. I want more training. So yes, it's kind of 2 years of, oh my gosh, can we put this, push this rock uphill? Do people really care about, providing the best standard of care? They do care, but it's not until you get to this point in an industry, which is really new. The medical aesthetics industry is very new.
Well, I think to your point, people do care. I'm not so sure that everyone cares. I really think that, I've seen so many stories where there was a bad outcome. So a patient had either an occlusion or burns or other bad outcomes where they reached out to the med spa that did that to them and they get hung up on or they don't respond and they returning their calls. And I think that that's uh, obviously horrible, right?
Yeah.
And as a physician, I mean, I can't even fathom that because you have a doctor-patient relationship you've established with the patient. You can't just decide you're not going to have that anymore. Like that's not
Mhm.
legal or ethical, right?
All right.
But if you're not a doctor and you don't know that and you're like, "Oh yeah, don't bother me. I gave you the service. We're done." I think that that's hugely problematic in the industry and I think pretty common.
Yeah.
I've interviewed several patients on this podcast who've had exactly that experience and then the person who did it to them didn't care, you know?
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think
And
I
what
mean
and
it's
what do
yeah, go
you
ahead.
do though? Like, and that's the biggest part is what do you do as a patient if that they're not they're hanging the phone up on you. They're just like, yeah, good luck, right? So have an option. Go to the next person who might be able to fix something. But how do you know? How do you know if they're
Yeah.
just as good or bad or indifferent? Or do you go to ER? Do you go to plastic surgery? So what I was saying before, there's not a rules and regulations. There's tons in the medicine side, but medical, like really, because there's so many different people in it in the business, different layers and levels of professionals, there's not the accountability that there should be. And that is one thing we're working with here in Michigan is let's start with some transparency. I want people throughout the state of Michigan to be able to go type in the name of any medical spa in Michigan and find out who the doctor is. Right now, you have
Right.
no idea who that doctor is. So then you can go and do a little research and see what their credentialing looks like. They're a ER doctor or they're XY doctor. It doesn't matter as long as it feels good for you, right? As long as you're good with who that doctor is, that transparency just really, really helps, I think, everyone move forward. Um, and then there's another level of credentialing. So you could have, I love to call it a qualified medical director. Qualified medical director allow a doctor like yourself to put additional credentialing behind their name. And it's, there's multiple ways to get that credentialing. And the next level is licensure. Licensure would mean med spas have to be licensed in the state of Michigan. The first level was just registration. I'm just putting my name in, tells me the doctor. But then you go all the way up to licensure, which really then is protocol and procedure to open a facility, to make sure your doctor is a QMD, to make sure you are being transparent. So those are things that we're working on here in Michigan and I would love more states to turn on their associations. But right now, there's only about 4 out there.
Well,
Texas has one. Yeah.
so my goal for 2025, right? My goal
Yeah.
last year was to publish the book, so did that.
Yay.
But my goal this year is to establish a med spa board that would be a national nonprofit organization run by people who are credentialed in the field, who will basically create a certification for med spas. And because the problem is all the laws are different in each state, who can do what, who can delegate to who's legal,
Mhm.
corporate practice, all of that. And as I've covered in the book and on this podcast, there are all these questions you need to ask when you're picking a new med spa or picking a new aesthetic provider. And, one is who's the medical director, and then look up their license. And then who is the provider who you're going to actually see for the procedure, and look up their license. And it's really, really hard to do on some of the other things. The ownership, that's hard to look up. And then also where they're getting their product, also hard to look up. So my goal is to have just a national certification so that there is this label, certified med spa, certified by the med spa board, where you can tell. It's kind of like certified organic when you go to the grocery store. Everybody basically knows what that means, right? And so, that certification will guarantee that at least as of the moment they were certified, they were operating legally. It doesn't mean they're fantastic at what they do, but it means at
Right.
least that they're legal and they have the qualified people there, and they're getting real product. Now, and
Right.
my vision for this is that people would recertify every year. And so that, because a lot of med spas have rotating medical directors, they like have one right now and that person's never there. And then that person doesn't want to do it anymore because of lots of reasons, but one, bad outcomes are a really big one. So, what's interesting is the accounts that you have with all the vendors. Like I'm sure you have an account with Allergan
Mhm.
to get your Botox, and with Galderma to get, your Restylane or whatever.
Yep.
Those accounts are set up once and they're never set up again. You could have a medical director for 5 seconds, set up your Botox account, and never have another medical director. And Allergan doesn't check, and they don't have the medical director sign in every year or anything. Like, as far as they're
Right.
concerned, once you set it up, you're done. And so I asked Galderma one time, would you guys just require that form once a year? Why wouldn't they? Well,
Right.
they don't want to, because they don't want to not sell it to that place that's buying it, right? Even if they're not buying it legally. They're like, no, we knew it. They had a medical director 10 years ago. Well,
But don't you feel they're doing themselves a disservice? Because, you know, Botox has gotten in some trouble recently. Different
yes,
products get in trouble at different times because of bad outcomes. So the
right.
first thing that patient's going to do is share what product it is. So I feel like that is such a short-sighted answer because I have talked to a lot of CEOs of the major providers of the injectables in this market, and I've only had a couple say, "I want to hear more on this." Most of them are of the same mindset of, "Well,
Yeah.
why don't you, like you said, let's have some checks in place."
I do think that once you're speaking publicly, then they agree with you, because they don't
Yeah,
want to be on the side of, selling to someone illegally. They don't want to
right.
be on that side publicly, right? So I think that the Med Spa board as I'm envisioning it,
Yeah.
would just kind of, and the thing is, it would be voluntary, but my goal is it wouldn't cost much. It would be some kind of nominal fee to to cover administration. And so why wouldn't you want that label, right?
Uh-huh.
And then for consumers, once this becomes kind of commonplace, the way certified organic is common now. When organic came out, it like didn't, well, what does that mean? And who's really organic? And was it
Mhm.
really grown without pesticides, or are they just greenwashing it or whatever? But now it has an actual meaning, right? And
Right.
if it's not really organic,
Doesn't
Whole
pass
Foods
it.
won't sell it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
And so my goal has always been to educate the public, but then also I think with this, it'll make it much simpler. You won't have to ask all those questions because the Med Spa board is going to ask those for you. All you
Mhm.
need to know is it certified or not, right? And I think that ideally there would be all kinds of other things happening too, like a more national set of standards, because right now they really are very different state to state. And you might be doing something legally in one state, and then you move and it's no longer legal and you have no idea,
Right.
right? And so I think that it would be great to have a national set of standards for med spas, and that's why I think the med spa board would uphold that and just make sure, oh yeah, maybe it's legal for an esthetician to inject in Texas, but we won't certify you if you're not a medically trained person to
Mhm.
inject,
Right.
right?
Well, and I think that's the hard part too, because we all do look at. So I think it's great. A national standard is wonderful, and I really would love to help you with that. So let me know how I can. But I think it's hard because, like you said, there's so many different standards in every state. So what does the consumer know or what do they believe? I'll say consumers are pretty smart. That there's a whole generation, they call them the C generation, these consumers that only buy things after doing research online, which I think a lot of us do. But I think that's the hardest part is how do you become as transparent as possible to the consumer? That's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, I do think the consumers are really smart. And I think that
Mhm.
most people, maybe not everybody, but most people, if they were looking at a med spa and there weren't even any nurses there were like non medical people injecting, they wouldn't want to go there.
Mhm.
Okay. Like that sounds crazy to me, right? Like a non medical person injecting. I mean, I guess if you're a heroin addict, it's not crazy, but like,
But here's
like,
the thing, we just stopped the law going in where the beauty association here wanted to allow estheticians to do laser without a medical director. So that's
yeah,
something we did as an association is it was its way through and it can, we were able to stop, we were able to help modify it. So there's no that is able to do laser without a medical director. So I think that's the thing that is hard. Like when you're a consumer, is you don't know who can or can't do it, right? So you want people to ask those
right.
questions, but they just don't know.
Right. And the problem is the politicians don't really understand medicine. So,
Nope.
they're like, oh, the laser, blah, 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 and may not really realize, oh, that's the practice of medicine, you
Yes.
know? And so you can't just say, oh, yeah, like only doctors can practice medicine. Oh, except in Michigan, an esthetician can perform laser treatments, right? It's like,
Right.
no. But I also think that a lot of consumers don't necessarily realize that some of the treatments they're having are the practice of medicine. I mean, even, weirdly, IV bars, which to me is so very directly medical, right? Like, where do we put in IVs? In the hospital when someone's
Hmm.
having surgery or they're dehydrated or they need IV, medication. The idea that an IV bar exists so you can like go order it like a cocktail at a bar and just pick your own
Hmm.
IV
Hmm.
and put whatever it is you want in your vein. That's to me totally nuts. But it seems that a lot of people across the country don't realize that's a practice of medicine. No,
Well,
but
it seems like a
obviously, like
fun
that's
thing.
that's actually the most dangerous thing that anyone does
Yeah.
is IVs. I mean,
Hmm.
that can kill you instantaneously if you put
Yeah.
the wrong thing in that
Yeah.
IV bag. So I do think that there's a lot to be done, but I really do think that there are many, many really fantastic med spas across the country that are doing really great work, that are doing it legally, that are really out there pioneering the coolest new treatments. in a safe and legal way. And I really am grateful that that's what you're doing in Michigan. And I think that any effort, whether it's statewide or nationally, to certify and make sure that things are safe and legal, I mean, I applaud that because it's really overdue at this point. The
Uh-huh.
industry is over 20 years old. I know that's still young as industries go, but
Uh-huh.
when it comes to the kind of treatments people are doing, I mean, you can really, really do a lot of harm
Yes.
if you don't do it well.
Yeah, and I think that's the exciting part for you and I, right? Like it's this newer industry, but we're at this point where people are really like we said, the people are starting to care. People are starting to care.
Mhm.
When I say people, I'm talking about the healthcare professionals. We're actually getting like, I don't want to hurt anyone. I want to do the right thing. Where before it was all about this money grab and or maybe corporations can always do the right thing, but it's coming to a point where we're going to start seeing some change, and it's only change we said at a national and state level can hope for. We really can only hope that professionals in this industry choose to make a difference, and that's what keeps me awake in a real positive way every night, is going, how can I make a difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. I think it's a little bit shocking to people in mainstream medicine what's going on in aesthetics. I
Mhm.
think that people who are in the hospital head down doing their operations, seeing
Yeah.
patients, have really no idea that there's this paramedical universe out there doing all kinds of crazy things to people, and nobody's watching, nobody's paying
Uh-huh.
attention. And
Uh-huh.
I just think that consumers just need to be aware of what they're
Uh-huh.
getting because there's so much great stuff. Like that's why it's so popular. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Like neither of us looks like we're in our 50s. Okay. So we'll just say that. So
Right.
that's why, this stuff works. And so it's very
Right.
popular. But for everything like that, where there's money to be made, there are going to be people just trying to take your money and not worry about the risk to you. And as a physician, that's what keeps me awake at night in a very not very happy way. Is like
Mhm.
absolutely do no harm. Absolutely. I don't want anybody, I don't even want people unhappy that the thing we did just didn't do much. Right.
Mhm.
Like that's really huge to me. I mean, as a business person, I think that's really huge, right?
Mhm.
You don't want to be selling something that doesn't work. Okay.
Right.
So obviously that is not going to make you much money because nobody's going to want that. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
but the things that keep me awake are like absolutely no harm. I
Yeah.
don't want to wake up and find out that like, somebody got a burn or a occlusion or whatever. And you just need to be aware as a consumer. Like it's really important to vet this place before you go.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's a good thing we're both staying awake thinking about the industry and how we can change it for the good, right?
Right, right. Well, Nicole, this has been just an awesome conversation. I really appreciate your being with me today. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Kate D. I appreciate you. And every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed this two-part discussion with Nicole Gregory. If you're interested in trying to reach either one of us, there'll be links in the show notes, so check those out. If you've learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. If you have a question or a crazy story of your own you'd like to share, please send an email or voice recording to info@drkatedee.com. That's DRKATEDEE.com. Or reach us through the website medspamayhem.com. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening. This has been MedSpa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star review. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medspamayhem.com.